Hey everyone, I'm Connor. I'm a senior here at UCF, and I am a lighting artist. That's what I'm doing in workshop, and I also dabble in VFX as well. So I'm going to tell you guys how to do scenes in Unity 3D and some pros and cons to lighting and how we make our scenes look good. So, what is lighting and why does it matter? So, in our game industry, lighting affects many different departments. Namely, these are the core ones that will affect, which is art, design, programming, narrative, VFX, and cinematics. It's very, very closely tied to narrative because lighting is going to tell a story. You look at any type of flashbacks, either it's like a black and white one, or they have like I know the Fallout series did it where the main character, I can't remember her name, but she was having a flashback and it's like bright and sunny. Like she remembers it was like really, really good, right? Ended up, I don't know if it's spoilers if anyone hasn't seen it. It was not good. So um, but yeah, it narratively it's really, really good. VFX as well, that's definitely something to take into account because depending on the shaders you use for your VFX, it will interact with lighting. You can make it where it doesn't interact with lighting; it's just the color itself. We'll get into that a little bit as well. And then lastly, cinematics. Cinematic trailers are really, really advanced. There's a lot of working parts to them. The most I'm going to show you is just basically like a. Has anyone here played Destiny before? Okay, we got one gamer. So, did you play Crucible at all? Okay, so you know how it loads in the map and then the camera like shows off the environment? That's basically what I'm going to show you today. And that's cinematic enough. It's like a little trailer for the scenes we work on. So that's as much as I'll get into that a little bit. Because there is a lot. I just don't want to overload you guys. So basically, lighting's going to overall enhance the characters and the environments you work on. Who here wants to make cool shit? Okay, awesome, awesome. Lighting's gonna really, really help that. And it's definitely not something to hold on to last minute to do because a lot of people have made that mistake. Namely, I was one last year because they were like, "Oh yeah, we're the lighting sucks for this. Like, let's try it." And so that was last year around springtime. Towards the end was when I started my lighting journey and all that stuff. Now that I know what I have, I'm gonna tell you guys about it, and I'm gonna tell you how it fits in with our game design and how you can guys go about approaching that. So, a couple of vocabulary slides we got here. These are really, really important. So brightness, it's basically going to say how bright or how dark a light is. Different times of day and different scenes and aesthetics will require this to be different. And then the attenuation is basically just the radius of the light. Different lights will have different attenuation radiuses. This right here off to the right is a point light, and as you see, it's got these three circular lines around it. That is the attenuation radius. You can adjust these in engine as you see fit for the scene and what you think works best. The color and temperature. So this is going to basically be like, hey, I want to have a red light for like an exit sign or a green light for a traffic sign. Those are very useful for different types of lighting in your scene. Different colors will mean different things. For example, yellow and white is symbolizes purity. Think of the Elden Ring side of grace, how it's yellow, it's pure. You know it's safe. You can go there and rest. So lighting will trigger different emotional responses and also signal the player different areas of safety or violence. And then also to add on to that, the temperature is also really, really important as well. It depends on the scene and what you're trying to go for. Warmer scenes can be safer, and then darker scenes obviously will be a little bit colder, a little bit more eerie, depending on what you're going for. So the other vocabulary we have is called rays. If you guys are familiar with God rays, these are a type of rays. These are basically just a light coming from a source, typically your sun or moon. And in Engine, you can use volumetric fog to simulate God rays to help the light showcase that. Bounce light is just going to be the light reflecting off the environment. If you take a look at this picture off here to the right, this is the bounce light right here coming from the scene. You have the main light source coming here, hitting this, and here's the highlight. Then the ambient bounce light from the room is on the backside, and then we have the shadow because there's a lack of light. So shadow, again, lack of light. These we'll talk a little bit more about shadows as well. So the importance of shadows, you want to ask yourself when you're designing your levels and coming up with a draft of how you want your game to be. Is it going to be interior, exterior? You really want to start with that first, and it's very, very important because it's very different to do that. Some interior scenes don't have windows, some do. If it does have windows, you're going to need a skybox and you're going to need a sun or moon because the player will be able to see out of it. And it will also contribute to ambient lighting and global illumination for your scenes. If it's exterior, usually it's just a directional light. Again, sun or moon, and you can do other lights to help fill in the scene as well as you see fit. And we'll get a little bit about that as well with post processing because post processing is a very, very valuable tool in Engine that helps us sell the illusion of scenes and whatnot. But back to shadows. So different types of day will have different types of shadow strengths. You know, you've got your morning, noon, afternoon, and night. Night's going to have really dark shadows. Noon at the highest peak of the sun is also going to have really dark shadows, and then there's going to be some variations between morning and afternoon as well. So keep that in mind. And always as not even as a lighting artist, but just in general, you want to make sure the aesthetics for your scene matches the creative vision. Um, how many first years we got in here? Any first years? First years. Okay, cool. So this is like a team based program. So you're gonna have typically a creative director who's gonna have the creative vision for the game, and he's going to be like, "Hey, I want this scene to mirror this type of movie or this type of scene or this kind of game or be reminiscent of something." And you want to try and match the aesthetics of the scene with lighting as best as you can based off of that description. He'll also provide references for you. You can also find references yourself. We'll talk about pure ref and how that goes into lighting and why you should use it. So, a couple tools that we use. These are the baseline tools that we have to light our scenes. We have the directional light. Like I was saying earlier, this is usually your sun or moon, and you will set it accordingly to the color and shadows that you want in Engine. You have the point light. Remember earlier on. Welcome in. How you doing? Pretty good. So remember the point light from earlier? These discs, this is the attenuation radius, and it's basically like a light bulb. Very useful for lighting lamps, among other things. Spotlight. Think of your theater lights. If you've been to a theater before, they've got a stage, and they'll have theater lights to shine down on the character. It has this cone-like shape to it. You can adjust this as well in Engine. It's very, very useful for not as useful as area lights, but it does get the job done if you need it to have like a bigger radius. Area lights, it's this one right here, this square light right here. So even though it's rectangular in shape, it still illuminates a circular cone of light. Keep that in mind. And then we'll talk about how you can use that in scene and things to avoid that or problems that could happen with these as well. But basically, area lights and baked lighting is your bread and butter when doing scenes because they are very, very cheap resourcefully. What's up?
So for the area light, that's the one to stretch attenuation to make.
Yeah, yeah, you can stretch the point light, spotlight, and area light attenuation radius. The directional light is basically just like an overcast of the scene. You can't really adjust its radius. It's like at a fixed point, but you can change the color of it and the shadow strength.
For the point light, can I adjust the radius of just one point? Like they have three axes, you know. I don't want to make it like spherically big. I want to stretch it to the side.
So in that case, your best bet would be using a rectangular area light because think of like a long bar light.
Yeah.
That area light's going to be used for that, whereas it's not going to be for a light bulb because a light bulb's going to be at a certain point and it's just stretching it out. So you're going to get an outer radius from like the outer glow of it, but it's going to be strongest at the center. Whereas if you have an area light, you can stretch it and it will shine the entire way. So we'll also talk about emissives that will also help with that. That's a little bit later in the slides. Yeah, what's up?
So for the directional light, does it go through objects? Because whenever I play this in the video, kind of regardless of where the objects are, they're being affected by.
Mhm.
How does that?
Yeah, so Unity does a little fun thing. I hate it personally, but um, typically, I'm assuming you run into problems where is this an interior scene that you've been working on, or
It was exterior, but there were things below
things below?
that were still affected by it.
Yeah, so that light is going to cast shadows on those objects, and on those objects, you can set it to receive shadows or not, or contribute to global illumination. We'll get in that when we do a scene breakdown as well. A thing that you will need to remember for interior lighting is if you have windows, obviously you're going to be using a directional light to help with the ambience and the global illumination. If you are using a plain model, like a flat plane surface, Unity, we in the editor will see that it is flat, and we can peer in from the outside. Unity will recognize this as itself and be like, "Hey, the sun's going to shine through that," and it's like, I don't want it to do that. So the simplest fix to do that is to set the directional light to baked. That way, it is baked, and now Unity realizes, "Hey, I'm not supposed to go through this. There's something blocking here." So we'll get in that as well.
It'll figure out what.
Yeah, yeah. So Unity, it basically just like has the same view as we have in the scene editor. Is that we'll peer in from the outside. It's like a flat planar wall, but really we know that wall is being blocked, though Unity doesn't. So we'll get into that as well. So as I was mentioning earlier, baked lighting, we've got dynamic versus static and mixed. So these different lights right here, you can set to be any of these three, which is either baked, dynamic, or mixed. So dynamic is going to be your most realistic lighting. Think of a flashlight, how you turn that on and the light is updated on every single frame when no matter where you point it. Same as the shadows. So again, these are going to be the most realistic, but they're also the most resource intensive in terms of performance because it has to update on runtime every frame. Static lighting, this is your bread and butter because these are going to be stored on the Unity light mapper texture. So basically, what that means is that it's going to be stored on the texture and not computed at runtime. So the scene already knows that your GPU actually already knows that it's stored on this texture. It's just going to reference how it's going to look. And this isn't going to update light or shadows at runtime, but we have ways to make light and shadows do update dynamically at runtime through the use of light probes. We'll get into that a little bit later on with this. The only thing about static lighting is that it uses the disk memory, so your storage for it. It's important to keep in mind that with our projects, we have about 2 gigabytes of space. So you want to use these. You want to basically use the least amount of lights in your scene to get the most value and fill in lighting where it needs to be. So these will be stored on the light mapper texture, and we'll go in and I'll show you what that looks like as well in the scene. And then we have our mixed lighting. So mixed lighting combines both dynamic and static together. So unfortunately, the light will not update on runtime, so it's at a fixed area for that light. But the shadows will update. So say you have a player move through a mixed light, the shadows will update dynamically like a dynamic light would. However, the light will not move. So these are very good for just stagnant lights that aren't going to move and that you still want the player to have shadows updated on. What's up?
Was mixed one also saved in the game file?
Yes, it's also stored on the light mapper texture. These are a bit more expensive for storage than the static lighting. So you can have any of these lights here set to static. But if you have like a spotlight set to mix, it's going to be a little bit more memory expensive, but not performance expensive really. So the name of the game is trading performance for visual fidelity. You want to get the highest amount of visual fidelity while still maintaining really good performance. And in the scene I'm going to show you, I'm running it at 4K and we're getting over 100 FPS. So it's really, really good and optimized for it. Obviously, you can set it to different resolutions. Typically, like the most demanding that they'll ask of you is 1920 by 1080. That's like baseline. It has to run at like good FPS at that. So this is to make sure that hey, it's going to look good and it's going to run well. So just keep that in mind. What's up?
So you said roughly like 2 gigabytes of storage per layer. Is that like
Oh no, not for lighting. Like 2 gigabytes of storage for the project.
Like
So
Photoshop project?
yeah. So yeah, even for workshop. Yeah, good point. So yeah, that's why it's like no one really knows lighting that well because it's very expensive. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you adjust or allocate more memory or storage like you said?
Allocate more memory to GitHub or
So
in the
you said we have 2 gigabytes
in the project through GitHub. So GitHub is basically you're going to be using that in teams. So GitHub is basically saying, hey, we have the main master branch here. I'm going to branch off of master and work in the scene myself. That we updated. It's like a centralized system that you're going to be using in teams for your projects. And so that the project itself, the repository, is 2 GB max. That's the amount of allotted memory we have for this game design.
That's for like the free version of GitHub, though, right?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. You would have to pay more, but typically it's a requirement that you work within the confines of 2 GB for most of the projects because the professors will have to update or will have to open up the builds you guys submit, and if it's over 2 GB, they're going to ding you on that.
I get that.
Yeah.
But like in the future, like if we were doing our own project outside of the school,
Mm-hmm.
we could always consider that option.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think it's like $2 to upgrade the memory, so it's like really relatively cheap. But yeah, for like these projects, you want to work within the confines of 2 GB. Lighting shouldn't. It's scene dependent, but lighting at the very max, at the very highest, I wouldn't personally go over 300 megabytes. Um, Now it's easier said than done. So you're going to really have to have good artists that know game ready assets and what kind of topology that's like. And we'll get into that a little bit as well with textures and whatnot. And um, for this purpose, the scene I'm going to show you is going to be in Unity's URP. So is anyone familiar with that pipeline? No. Okay. So Unity's URP is just the Universal Render Pipeline. It is basically meant for light desktop games and mobile games, and that fits perfectly within our major because that's basically what we were doing. And so we have 2 GB of space, and with the URP, it is more optimized on textures. So on some of the textures, it'll be like if you do VFX, you'll need like a custom, like if you want like a custom texture. Um, some of them will be like 5 MB, but with URP, it's down to like the kilobytes, right? So it saves a lot of memory. What's up?
Would any of this apply to GitHub?
Yeah, I'd say like building good practices, and you can use this across engines. Unreal's the same. Like you still have a 2 GB limit, and you need to also figure out how to save optimization and memory size in there. Whether if you're using the static lighting, like Unreal Engine 4 did, or if you're using Unreal Engine 5, you can still use static lighting, but you can also use Lumen. It's just a different process for optimizing. So, what's up?
Do you get points off in the workshop if it goes over 2 GB?
You can fail, yeah.
Really?
Yes. So this is why I'm doing it now. So people are like, hey, like we need to do lighting because it needs to look good and like we want to, convey a certain certain mechanic or a certain kind of mood and atmosphere. It's very important that you guys nail this down because it is a huge part of games, as you all know. We all play games, especially with remakes. Graphically they are updated, but they are also really really huge, mostly because of like textures and whatnot and all that. So you want to make sure. What was that one remake? It was was it Last of Us? The like
What was last?
Yeah, the Last of Us remake, and on like PC, the lighting was terrible and just fragmented. So you want to make sure that you do the best you can. You'll find that you'll run into certain problems that can arise, like craters on objects, and we'll go into like how you fix that and whatnot. Because I've run into it. So if you guys have any questions at any point, just feel free to ask me. What's up?
What kind of what are you guys doing right now where you have to like, do something with Unity?
Yeah. So at they'll typically ask for builds of your game throughout the process. I'm going to basically tell you about workshop. So workshop, you'll be asked to submit different types of builds, and basically when you make a build, you select what scenes you want to include, and from that, it will tell you how big the size is. So you'll typically have teams of anywhere from, for workshop, you'll have teams of anywhere from 10 to 15 people. So as you can imagine, 2 GB is really limited. So you want to make sure what you're doing isn't like gargantuous. So
What I mean to really say,
Mhm.
what what do you guys? Because I'm computer science. Maybe I'm not at this level yet.
Mhm.
I know the gaming track was maybe 2 credits.
Yeah.
maybe.
Mhm.
Is everybody here or some people here maybe game design majors that maybe have to put more credits to these kind of projects or professor?
No, so basically you just submit the build and you can just check in the properties how big the build is. It'll tell you like how many gigabytes it is or megabytes. And so as long as it doesn't go over 2 and the game is functional and working, you won't get dinged on points of it. I've known people to fail because they did not stay within the confines of 2 gigabytes. It is something that can happen. So you want to make sure that you're building iterations of your game and checking the memory size and making sure that the mechanics and systems are working within that build. So, but any other questions right now, or good? Good. Okay. Cool. 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 So, as you're doing lighting, we talked about shaders a little bit earlier with VFX. So, shaders are going to basically be responsible for producing the visual effects that you will see in game, and we'll talk a little bit about shaders. So in URP, I don't know if I told you URP a little bit, but URP is more of a optimized pipeline that you can use for your teams. You'll want to make sure that when you're making VFX or making environments, you have the right shader for that asset. So with VFX in URP, you can just select the URP particle system and then have it as lit or unlit. Lit's going to mean it's going to be affected by the lighting. Unlit means it's not going to be affected by the lighting. And then materials. These are really big. This is how your artists are going to have their texture showed in Engine. So in Unity, it's really simple to make material. You just right click, create material, and then you rename it. And then when you have that material selected, you just go up to the shaders part. Excuse me. You just go to the shader part and select which kind you want. There's a bunch of different ones. There's so many of them, but the main ones you'll be using are for particle systems, URP lit or unlit, maybe some terrain, and that's basically it. I couldn't really see using more. There is a ton of them though. So if you guys want to get more information on shaders, get in Engine, check it out, see what they do, Google all that good stuff. But basically, the shader is part of the material and it determines how it's rendered by the GPU. So it's going to have the shader is going to have, or the material is going to have all the textures and colors, the reflection maps, the normal maps, all that stuff. It's going to be on that, and then the shader is going to tell it what to do. So as you can see here, oops, so skybox is included. I do need to mention skyboxes. Skyboxes are very important, especially for exterior scenes. This one here is just the fun fact. In Unity, when you load the default scene, it comes with a procedural skybox. You cannot edit that skybox, unfortunately, like you can on Unreal. In Unity, you have to make a new material, go up to the shader and select the skybox, and there's a few different options, and you select which one you want for your game. Then you can go and edit it, and I'll show you how to do that, and I'll also show you how to put it in the lighting rendering settings. So with this one, again, procedural just means it's boundless. It has a couple things like sun size, sky tint, ground color, the exposure of it. And then right here, we have a new material itself. So this is the universal render pipeline particles, and it's also lit. So this means it's going to be affected by lighting as well. You have this one right here, this VFX I was making. I have a particle shader, and it's unlit. So this means I do not want the lighting to be affecting the particle emission or the VFX. And then right here, yeah, this one's lit. This is also going to show you this is going to interact with the lighting. It's also worth mentioning, this is how you also create emissive materials. So you can have an unlit material, and then you just click this emission box right here, and that will give you emission. We'll talk about emissives here. They're really, really fun. They're really useful. So again, static lighting and emissives are your bread and butter for lighting these scenes. They are going to increase performance, but the only drawback is that it is on that light mapper texture, so it's going to increase the memory. There's ways to optimize it, and it does tell you how much memory you are using for the scene, for lighting that is. So here's a skybox, like a custom skybox. These can really help enhance your scenes. I definitely would recommend getting into that. They do come at a cost to performance, but you can do certain shaders that could reduce that. So reflection probes, I really like reflection probes in Unity. Basically, you just take a reflection probe in the scene. You can set it up to be boundless or through box projection. So box projection is going to make it. So basically, you would use box projection in a like square or rectangle kind of room, and then you would just increase it based off where you need it to go. You can use multiple of these, and it is better that you do so because you want the reflections to update uh, correctly. So you can blend them with other probes as well. So again, you can set these to boundless or keep it on the box projection for depending on the scene. These are also really good for if you have an exterior scene and you have an indoor cabin or any sort of indoor housing, anything like that. You can use these with post processing volumes to blend correctly, and it's a really good technique. So, to show you the reflection probes in effect, so you'll notice that as we're moving through the scene, this is all done in Engine, by the way, including the trailer. So as you move through the scene, you can see the shadows updating. You can see the reflection from the lights on the metal up here, um, and on the floor as well, because there is metal on those floors as well. So with that, um, it's important to know what kind of art direction you want to go for. So for this one, I when I did this one, it was Camino inspired. If anyone likes Star Wars here, anyone, anyone, couple. Okay. All right, good ones, good ones. So I love Camino. I loved the clones. So I was like, you know what? I want to make it look like Camino. So that's what I did. And then light probes. Light probes are very good. I love using these, and I hate using these because it's very tedious. So fun fact: you guys are in the major still, and I would really recommend you guys using Unity 6000 and above because for lighting, at least, that is. So with lighting, the light probes, you have to individually set them up on all versions below Unity 6000. It's very tedious, very time consuming. It takes a lot of trial and error to get the shadows and light correctly updating because they are linearly interpolated at a certain point, and you want to have those blend with each other. So you might notice like, oh hey, I'm walking through like the scene, and it gets really bright, and then it goes back to normal lighting. You want to add more probes to fix that, and then do a rebake. So as you can see, like no light probes here on the left. Even though this is an emissive light and it is technically simulating light, it's not updating on this NPC. But with light probes, it can. It will update the shadows in the light. They're very useful, and they add another layer of juice to your games. So speaking of lighting, uh, the alternative light sources that you can also do are particle effects. They are very useful. They're a very unique technique to use in game. So, for example, these God rays, URP does not by default have God rays. So, to fix this, all you would have to do is create a gradient texture, apply it to a mesh, and then use it in the scene, and it will simulate God rays, even though they are not actually being lit. Also, in here, the textures and geometry again meshes. This here has a outer glow. All this is a sphere with a texture on it applied in Engine, and that is not actually a light. So it's got that little bit of glow going to it. This is the fire, but this glow here is um, just a mesh with a texture on it. Very useful. Also reduces cost in Engine. So now that we know that emissive lighting, really good bread and butter love lighting. So this isn't actually a light; it just simulates light. If you have a dynamic emissive going on, which means it updates on every frame, Um, Basically, like if you were to use like a blinking emissive, you wouldn't want the emissive material that's attached to the object. The object should not be static, because if you set the object to static, it's going to bake and it's going to look wrong when you do a bake. So if you have a dynamic emissive material on an object, make sure that object is just not set to static and it should update properly. So these are really, really good for guiding player attention. They're also really good for mechanics. Again, like buttons, like light sources, whatnot. And you can use these in a realistic setting or even in a stylized setting. It kind of just depends. Another really, really common example you'll see is lanterns. They can be an emissive and they're really, really good. They're really, really cheap. So, again, examples of emissives. Right here, you can see the light probes and how they're set up. So they are blending together. So as you can see, emissives will cast a light when they are baked on a static object, but they do not update on a dynamic object until you add light probes. So that is why this example here has light probes in there. So it does update the lighting from both of these. And then again, obviously, these windows right here, just a simple plane with a emissive material on it. Yeah, what's up?
So do the light probes update, like, for example, is like everything inside of this frame is updated, are they facing certain directions, like the seat light, like how do they actually?
So I'll show you an engine how they are used, but basically imagine just balls in the air and they are connected via like a string, I guess. So you have this one point, say it's like really, really dark right here. Okay. You have a point right here, say it's like halfway between the light and the dark, and then boom, this one right here is like fully lit. It's going to blend those together, and as it updates, it will update dynamically. It will update on the dynamic object moving through it. So it looks like it blends correctly instead of just being like, hey, it's not responsive to the dynamic object. So they're really, really useful. Adds another layer of juice. And it's the little things that you are going to need to notice, um, especially when you're doing workshop in your games, because you want to make cool shit and you want people to enjoy it, So definitely like keep this in mind.
Okay, so that sphere, would that is like if that sphere was placed outside the triangle, it would still update, just sampling.
Yeah, so it doesn't have like a designated shape size to it. It depends on how many you use in the scene. So the biggest thing I can tell you is that you want to space them out. You want to test how dynamic objects look going through it. And then if something like a shadow or light isn't updating correctly, you want to add more light probes to that section, rebake, and then test again. They're very tedious. So that's why I recommend Unity 6000, because in Unity 6000, they have adaptive probe volumes, which basically they're already set up for you. And in Unity, you can go and edit it and do some minor tweaks to it. In Unreal, it's already in there by default. However, you can't really edit it without console commands, to my knowledge. In Unreal, these are just basically like updating in general. But in Unity, like any version below Unity 6000, you have to manually set these up and bake. So these are also just baked onto the light mapper texture. They're very, very cheap though. So, really, use them. It's just the only drawback is time. It's very time consuming setting these up. All right. So post processing. I love post processing. This is a really, really good technique to use for your scenes. Excuse me. So post processing, there's two different type of volumes, right? So we've got a global volume, as I was mentioning with the reflection probes earlier. Global means it's boundless, means it's going to affect the entire scene, and you can have multiple volumes in the scene. You'll have like a main global one, and if you want a certain section to be, say, like if you want the certain section to have like a black and white transition, you would just set up a local volume, and you would have it as soon as the camera enters that volume space, it's going to trigger that black and white color. So they're very, very useful. These should be the like you should not be using post processing until you have good lighting foundation set up, because post processing is just icing on the cake, just enhancing the aesthetics of it. You want to make sure that you just have good lighting in general, and just add slight tweaks that you want to be brought out through post processing. Is there also I should also mention, like, if you have an exterior scene, you can have a like, again, you can just have, like, a master global post-processing volume, and then say for, like, an interior cabin, you're able to go into, you would just have a volume inside of there, and you would have it basically within the confines of the building, and you can set a blend distance for, how fast it blends between the global master and the local one. These are really, really useful, and it helps, sell the illusion of the scene. So here's some before and after shots. On the left here, you can see it's very, very dull. This is just emissive lighting. And then on here, we have the final reflection probes, lighting, and post processing. These are really, really like the difference is quite big, I would say. So I would want to play a game on the right versus the left. The left looks a little bit boring, but it all depends on your creative vision that it's actually trying to match. So here's a scene breakdown of where to start lighting. So if you have any emissive materials, you want to get those up and running and attach it to any sources that you want to project the simulated light. In our pipeline for lighting, it comes as one of the last things to do, but it's also one of the most time consuming based on your scenes. So you'll have your level designers start whiteboxing out scenes. You'll have your artists making the assets that the designers will then go into engine and use in the levels to build out their levels. And at that point, once you have that, they'll get like triggers set up, they'll get the programming set up, that'll start coming along. And then once you have that set up, you can start the initial lighting uh, pipeline, which is basically getting your emissives in, starting your initial lighting, adding reflection probes, adding light probes, testing it how dynamic objects move throughout the scene, making sure that the light and shadows update correctly if you're using static lighting. So very, very important to keep in mind. So let's see. So things you should really avoid starting out: using too many lights. Um, I know lighting seems really, really scary at first, but it's not too bad once you get into it. You do want to make sure you're reiterating and getting as much feedback as you possibly can, almost to the point where you're really annoying. But as long as it looks as good as it can be for your skill level, then you're doing something right. So make sure you're lighting for gameplay versus cinematic. um, Lighting for gameplay is much easier because you want to get, again, the highest fidelity, good performance, and then if you want to make it have a cinematic look, you can go from there. So it's a very, very good base layer, and then you can transition into cinematics. So also to avoid using too much post processing, um, I've seen a lot of people just add a sky like a directional light and then just go crazy with direction or with the post processing, and then they're like, "Whoa, why is my VFX all like gross, and like why is this red now and orange, and why is this brown like not how it was like imported with the texture?" And you want to make sure that you have a solid groundwork of lighting, and at the very, very end, you just add icing on the cake, which is the post processing. Also, avoid using too much saturation. You don't want to have a muddied look to your scenes or like a blurred kind of look. Make sure you're not abusing lens flares if it's an exterior scene. I'd really not like to look up at the sun and just see God and just, flash my eyes. I really don't want that. Not a lot of people do, so keep that in mind as well. Um, Also gather like plenty of references based off of the creative vision. It's a
I'm saying not using lens flares, so if it's an exterior scene, you mean like they only work with interior scenes or
no, no, no. So like typically in exterior scenes, you'll have like a sun or moon, and if you're using a sun lens flare, is basically if you've ever like looked up the sun, it's just a really, really bright light as soon as you look up. Try to avoid doing that. You know, you can add it for realism if you want, and if the scene calls for it. But I personally stay away from them because I'm just not a huge fan of it. So it's completely up to you and your discretion. Just try and match the art aesthetics as much as you can in the creative vision. So now that we've got that out of the way, the references, very, very important. PureRef. How many people are familiar with PureRef? Nice. Are you guys using PureRef? Okay, good, good. PureRef is free. Um, It is basically just a program that you can have. You download it and you have it forever. It's free. So you can store as many pictures here as you want, and you would want that all in one area. It's very, very good for doing scenes, um, especially if you want to have references from movies or references from games. You can have it right there all in one place. And you would definitely want to use that throughout the lighting process and throughout post processing at the very end. Um, it's also very important to know which pipeline you're going to be using going into the project. I had mentioned URP before. Unity's Universal Render Pipeline, again, is meant for mobile games and very light desktop games, which is what we're making. So there's not really a use for HDRP, which is the high definition render pipeline. Namely, I'll name three reasons. The HDRP pipeline, it's not that optimized. It's more expensive on textures. Remember how I said that textures when in URP when you import them, they can be 5 megabytes, but they actually get reduced down to like 2 or in the kilobytes sometimes. Um, HDRP just has the full max amount. So if it's 10 megabytes for a texture, it is 10 megabytes in HDRP. So, and then also HDRP, people want to use ray tracing a lot. And no, you want to make the scene look as good as it can be before ray tracing. Like post processing, ray tracing, in my opinion, is just another layer of icing on the cake, right? It should not rely on it to sell the scene. And then again, cinematic versus gameplay. You want to start lighting for gameplay, and then make tweaks based off of gameplay. But if you have a scene where, like if you're doing a personal portfolio thing, and they are never going to be in the scene, like it's just showing off the scene, go crazy with it. Like you're not worried about optimization at that point. You're worried about how good it looks, right? As long as you're hitting good frame rate on the camera and it looks clean, it looks smooth, then yeah, go crazy. So, but keep that in mind. You'll not typically be doing cinematic lighting in our program, um, but you will be doing gameplay lighting. So you want to make sure you have it optimized for gameplay, whether if you're using Unity or Unreal or even Godot. Definitely make sure Unity and Unreal trade blows on certain things for lighting. Um, it's very easy to pick up Unity and then transfer over to Unreal for lighting. There's a lot of similarities, even though they use fully dynamic lighting in Unreal Engine 5 natively. You can still set it to static lighting if you want to through a plugin. So gathering references, again, it's very important to realize that games are technically restricted by the engine as opposed to a film set. A film set can use as many lights as they want to get the best shot, and the only drawback is that they don't have enough plugins. Whereas if we don't do a good job of lighting and optimizing, your game's gonna look wrong. It's gonna look the shadows aren't gonna update correctly. The performance is going to suffer heavily. Lighting is one of the biggest things to factor in when optimizing because it can make or break a game, and it is very expensive. So some good movies that you want to like look for references is the Alien series. Anybody seen Alien in here? Alien, okay, okay. Anybody see Romulus? Romulus. Oh, dude, Romulus was so good. Very, very good. The Batman series, it's also really good. The Witcher series on Netflix, that's very good lighting. Alien's kind of like a dystopia. Batman's like the city, and then Witcher is like medieval. So think about it like that, and then based off of what you guys want to do for your scenes for your games, look up references on that as well. So some good games that have very good use of lighting is Bioshock, Resident Evil 4 remake, Cyberpunk, Dead Space remake. You can even look at older games and see how they found unique solutions to the technological restraints. Um, I believe Doom back in the day had painted on light to the textures to simulate light, even though they didn't really do lighting. So it's neat things like that that you can find for workarounds for performance and aesthetics that you should really be looking into for your games, because at the end of the day, this is only going to help you. You can put this on your portfolio, you can put it on your resume. Hey, I did lighting for this, and here's what I did. I made I made optimized solutions for our gameplay experience. I made it so I created like textures that would be affected by lit or unlit shaders and stuff like that. So definitely very important to use. Some technical considerations. This is a really, really important slide. So baking in Unity or even on Unreal is based on your GPU, and it's going to eat up your VRAM, and so that's basically just the memory of the video card. So the more RAM you have is better. If you're using a 1080 Ti with like 4 GB, may not be enough. You could run into the error on the console where it's like I'm out of memory mid bake, and then that's a problem. So I think in here is like 4090s, so not really a problem for us in here. I know in 165 it's like how much is a 2080? It's like 10, 12? It's 8. Ooh. Okay. So, which isn't necessarily bad to have 8. You will have to. It's actually like pretty good because you will want to like test on different hardware how your game runs. So definitely keep that in mind. Not everyone's going to have like a 4070 Super or high end graphics card or even like mid range stuff. So you want to make sure that it's still running good on budget. Which is why a lot of companies nowadays that you see they'll release, but they won't release to certain console platforms because they have certain technical restraints they just can't meet and can't get it running good yet. So definitely keep that in mind. Yeah, what's up?
Is this room for better GPUs?
This room does have the best GPUs in the entire building. They have 4090s. Yeah. Yep. What's up?
So if I compile the game into an executable file,
Mhm.
will that be different from running in the engine? Like,
Yeah, so like you'll have like the build. As soon as you press play in engine, it should like so you could have a scene with main menu. You would go to that scene on main menu, press play, make sure that the scene manager is set up correctly, and it will take you to the first level, etc., etc. Um, you can play the game in like the editor. As soon as you press play, it should work. If it doesn't, that's a problem. You want to figure out why it's just not
yeah, but
playing.
the amount of the computer pushing GPU to the limit,
Mhm.
is it different from actual running it from the actual compiled build or running it in the engine? Like, are they different? Any different?
Oh, are you saying it's harder in engine versus like just the game
Yeah,
itself?
wouldn't that be harder?
I haven't really found it to be a difference. I know in Unity, I do this so much. So in Unity, there's a stats drop down that you can just select, and as you press play, you can go through your scene. You can see how many vertices and triangles are being rendered. You can see the FPS. You can see batches, which is basically saying, "Hey, batches are basically you would enable GPU instancing on the texture, and that will basically tell Unity, oh hey, these can be computed before runtime, so I can save performance and increase FPS. So it's very like as you want to make sure it's as optimized an engine as it can be, and then on final product when it's shipped, it should run hopefully flawlessly. If not like minimal bugs. So you can see in editor how well it's performing for your hardware and throughout the game. Good, cool stuff. All right, so again, like I said earlier, lighting is very taxing on machines. You want to find optimized solutions to your technical troubleshooting. I do not, and I'm sorry for you laptop warriors, I do not recommend baking scenes on a laptop. I would recommend a rig like in here or in any of the labs because it's it's a lot of power to do baking, and you know you never truly get the um, rig version of GPUs as you would in a laptop. Or sorry, you would never get the desktop GPUs like you would in a laptop because the laptop, I think you said it was what 4090 Geo. Yeah. So it's like 4070 Ti or like
Probably more like 4070.
40.
Performance, like,
So we have the highest 4090. It is now nerfed to a 4070 in a laptop. I want you to put that in perspective. It's not recommended. You probably can still bake on a laptop. It's just going to take a lot of time, right? So it's much quicker on a rig. So basically, if you're fine spending more time baking on a laptop, you can do it absolutely. I don't recommend it just because I know time is valuable, and I know you guys would rather be doing anything than basically baking a cake in an oven on your laptop. So keep that in mind. So again, time considerations, very time consuming when baking. When you as you optimize your lighting, you'll start with like lower settings, so that way the bakes are really really quick. You can iterate really really quick, and then when you do a final bake, which is basically how you're gonna present it to be like a portfolio piece, or if memory permitting, you can have the scene be up to like 40 resolution, and it will be the best it very very well can be. So keep that in mind. So different resolutions will have different bake times. So I'll show you that engine as well for the scene. So also don't wait to do lighting towards the end. You want to start implementing lighting the sooner the better, because you are going to run into problems. You are going to wonder why shadows aren't updating. You are going to wonder why um, certain assets now have craters in them, whereas they did not before. Uh, Keep that in mind. So it's also worth mentioning that we bake static assets in our games to save on performance. That way, the GPU does not kill itself at runtime, and it's like, wow, everything is like not baked down, so now I have to like render it all before pressing play. Um, yeah, so keep that in mind. Here's some really useful resources. Unity has got his own YouTube. Ben Cloward is he does VFX through the shader graph with Unity. I think he also does Niagara particle effects. Seda level design. He's a really really good level designer. He does lighting as well for the scenes. And he has some really really good pieces. He shows you the entire process, everything from white boxing, building out the levels, and then also doing lighting for the levels. Uguru's also a very very good person to reference for lighting. He shows a lot of like URP scenes and how to light them, and some common problems that he'll show and show you how to fix. And then Gabriel is a VFX artist. He's got really, really good VFX. This guy is the go-to for VFX in Unity and Unreal, and he shows how to make them. And you can follow along as a tutorial. You now are armed with that knowledge, and you go and make your own or do different variations, etc., etc. And then for the documentation side, we've got the lighting section. You want to make sure that when you go to the Unity documentation, you're selecting what engine version you're using, because it will change between the different Unity versions. I hate that Unity has like 20,000 different versions, and currently I think we have like 6 different versions on the lab PCs here. Um, so yeah, keep that in mind. So again, it will change based off of the engine version you're using. And it's also important to, at the very start of creating games and creating a pipeline for people to work in, you want to make sure that when you're creating a repository, you want to make sure that Unity is either using URP or HDRP based off of what you guys would like to do for your game. And then that's it for the slide. And so I'm going to tell you what you should absolutely start to do per scene for lighting. So, Unity, when you have a scene, you will have a render asset. This is basically telling Unity, hey, when we click play from the main menu, or we click play in general from any other scene, and we go to this scene, it is going to reference this render asset for the scene. So if you do not have this render asset in the scene, it's not going to update the lighting that you've done, right? So you want to make sure that all your lighting is tied to this render asset. If it's not there, it's not going to update. That's My buddy did a game jam just this past week, and he's like, "Hey, our lighting isn't working." And I was like, "What's up, man?" And I had to walk him through this process of what to do to set up in the scene, and it fixed it because it was referencing the correct render asset. So we have
To be on the hierarchy.
what's up?
It doesn't need to be on the hierarchy.
No, no, no. So here's the render asset right here. This little light with the gear shift or the gearbox. So this is just Unity saying, hey, this is the render asset. You can now drag and drop it up to this selection, or you can, if you have multiple, depending on whatnot. It's also worth mentioning that you should have one render asset per scene. You should not be using the same render asset throughout all the scenes, because you may want to make slight tweaks on one scene as opposed to another. And if you are using the same render asset and you push from GitHub into master, it's going to be like, hey, you've got different things going on here. It's going to make a conflict, or it's just going to look wrong. So you want to make one per scene, right? One render asset per the scene. That way Unity references it and it looks correct and updated. So in this scene, we're using mixed lighting, which basically means we are using, excuse me. Excuse me. So mixed lighting, baked global illumination. Like I said earlier in the lecture, that uh, baked global illumination is really really useful. It saves on performance and is very very cheap. So these aren't too important, but I will go over some of the big ones. For instance, progressive updates, you want to make sure that's turned off, because this is basically going to say when you do a generate lighting, it's going to basically prioritize what's in scene view. And if I can find the right button, Geo, what happened to the light?
Oh, it's just so people can see that.
I need to. Okay, there it is. Okay, so basically, the progressive updates. These are going to, if this is clicked on, it's going to bake what's in the scene first, and that increases the bake time. So if you want to do quick iterations, I recommend just turning this off or setting it up into a very specific spot where you want to see the lighting changes happen first, and you can just do a cancel bake if it's not coming out the way you want it to. Let's see what other ones are really important here. Environment samples and indirect samples. These are set. They used to have like drop down menu for these to set it to different ones. So if you change this to like 300, it'll go to 256, right? You can't get 300 samples. It just goes to this one instead. So if you are finding that the scene needs more, you can just increase it. A good way to remember the different tiers of it, you just come down to the max light map size drop down, and you can either do 32, 64, or any of these options. I typically, you really don't need to go for indirect or environment samples. You really don't need to go over 512. 512 gets the job done. You really don't need to, but again, test it in your scene if you really want to. See what it looks like, all that good stuff. Max bounces. This basically just means how many bounces the rays are going to have from like the sun or between other lights. So you've got 2 bounces here. Typically, you would just need like 3 or 4, depending. I wouldn't go below 2 though. Max light map probe sample. Let's bring this over. Oops. So yeah, light probe samples 4. That's perfectly fine. Filtering is just usually left on auto. Advanced will give you different options, which they aren't too important. These are more of like fancy schmancy ones. Not really important. Auto would typically take care of everything. Light map resolution. This one is really really important. So this one is going to tell you. This is the different texels per unit. And this is going to, you want to have like this to be like very very low, like single digits when you're iterating lighting, because if you leave it at 40 and you try to bake it, it's going to take a very long time. Like I said, it's like baking a cake in an oven. It's going to take a very long time. You want to have this like single digits and do testing of iterating lighting in the scene. And then light map padding, this is basically just telling let's see. Light map padding is basically just telling Unity how far apart these islands should be from each other. So this is just like 10. Yeah, as you can see, just like 10 units apart from each other on each object. So keep that in mind. It will also increase bake times. And let's see. So back to the scene. Max light map size again will increase bake time. Light map size you can go all the way to 4096, but it will increase the memory a lot. Typically, a good spot is between 512 and 1024. Now, since this was a portfolio piece for me, I went up to 2048 here because, as you can see, not a whole lot is in the scene, and it's only about 21.3 megabytes at these settings. Also, if you notice that you have certain craters in your assets from baking, it literally looks like someone like punched a hole in it or something like that, or it's very pixelated and fragmented looking. Um, Unity goes away. Unity basically says, "Hey, here's the compressor. You're gonna, tightly knit it together. If it's a problem on high quality, you can just reduce the quality, rebake, and see if that fixes it. There's different things that will happen in the bakes and whatnot, and you want to make sure that you're testing and iterating lighting as much as you possibly can, making sure that there's no problems on your assets, making sure it looks good, runs smooth, stuff like that. The lighting mode, there's a bunch of different ones here. Baked and direct. Um, Basically, these are from in order. The least demanding. Shadow mask is most demanding. Subtractive. They have different uses as well. You can consult the Unity manual to see what they all do, but I'm just on Shadow Mask because it's the most expensive, but also looks the best. Um, Also, right here we have light map parameters. This is how you're going. Like if you select the light map resolution to the single digits and you put this down to low resolution, it does a couple things. So it's really good for iterating lighting. Um, and it will bake really quick. So it's very good for that reason. Um, Typically towards the end is when you would want to crank this up because you want it to look the best. But it also will consume more memory on the disk. So keep that in mind. We want to optimize it as much as we can. And then we have, so I would recommend starting with very low resolution on the parameter, and again making light map resolution be like 2. That way you get quick bakes and you can test lighting very efficiently. And then when you're doing, you want to make sure that when you're lighting these scenes is that you either do real-time lighting or you do mixed. Rarely ever will you mix these together because that's where a lot of problems will happen. So it's either one or the other, either fully dynamic or you do mixed lighting. In mixed lighting, you can still have dynamic lights, right? It's just more control. Like you see the amount of settings in here for fully dynamic, it's nothing, right? But if you have mixed lighting, you have all these settings. You can play around, do whatever you want, test different things. So very important to know as well. What's up?
So for these render assets,
Mhm.
how do we use it?
Hi-
Like right now, you make a bunch of changes, but unless I bake it, I won't be able to see it in the scene.
Yeah. So by default, when you load into Unity, you'll just have the skybox, like the procedural skybox, and you'll have the directional light.
Yeah.
From there, you build out the level, and let's say you have a fully built level like this, right? And you're ready to do lighting. So from that point, you do lighting, and you're like, all right, yeah, like I want to do a bake. You would set these really low. Again, because these will affect bake times. You set these really low. I think you can set this down to like 8, the direct samples, and you would set these down to like 32, and just do quick iterations of lighting, right? And you'd also like keep these very small single digits. Light map padding you can set at like 2 maybe. Max light map size. The smaller, I wouldn't go any smaller than about 256. Um, But for quick iterations, you could go even down to 128, right? So once you have a good base or like the good settings you want to test, you would then bake or just come down here and hit generated lighting. That's how it's going to bake. And when you do that, it's going to have a little progress bar down here. You want to make sure when this bake is happening um, that you are not doing anything else in the scene. Do not touch it. It is like a cake in an oven. Let it cook. So that also means that if you are working in a team and someone says, "Hey, I need to hop in this scene. Is anybody on it?" Make sure they're not, because if they're changing how the level layout is or something, it's going to and they push through that and it's merged into your branch. It's gonna create conflicts. It's also going to mess up the lighting. You want to make sure that no one else is on the scene when you're doing lighting. Um, it is how it is. But telling you now, make sure that you are the only one on that scene doing the lighting, right? You want to make sure that when you are working with teams, when you're using GitHub, you will have your designers be building the levels. When the designers are done building the level, you want to pull from their branch into your branch for lighting, and you want to work on that lighting. You can then push into his, and then if it's all good to go, you can push into the master, which is going to be like your home uh, central thing that you just branch off of. So that's very, very, like very, very essential. Make sure no one's on the scene at all, stuff like that.
So I'm understanding this render asset as like a post processing save.
No, no, no. So
quality?
So post processing is going to be its own different thing. This lighting render asset is just for the lighting, like all the lighting settings, like all the tweaks and stuff.
Yeah, so you can make a duplicate of it and change the values and
Yeah,
select to make it based on your agent.
yeah. So if you have a different scene, you can duplicate this original value because you do want to have cohesion between scenes. You can duplicate this value, and then you can do like a test bake again. Just decrease those settings to get a quick bake, and then if it's looking good to you and like you're getting good feedback and you're like, oh yeah, pull it, you can just crank up the settings to match either the original or however much that you need it or however much you think it needs, right? So you want to have one render asset per scene. Very, very important. You can duplicate the original one that you start working with and tie it up to the lighting settings. Each scene will have its own. Each scene will have its own lighting render asset. Just make sure that that is step number one.
And this affects every single lighting.
This affects the scene, all the lighting, the shadows, all that good stuff. So it will basically tell you the quality of the light you'll get, right?
Okay.
So, and then post processing is also its own thing, which I will show you here in a second. For the environment, again, you can have the skybox material. Really, really simple to make. You just come in here, go to create. You just right click here, go to create, and then you go to material. And then from this material, you can name it whatever you want. Go into the inspector. As you can see, it's just our universal render pipeline lit. But if you type in skybox, yep, you'll have different ones you can use. This is just a procedural one. You have a six-sided cube map, panoramic, another cube map. So you could just do a procedural one, and again, it has those other ones. You could do the skybox. Let's see. You could do a cube map. It's just an HDR one. This is expensive to do, the HDR one. But if you have the resources to do it and like it doesn't affect performance, go for it, especially if it's an exterior scene or if there's a scene that's interior and has windows, I don't see why not. What's up?
Slightly unrelated. In the editor, someone was wondering, how do you make so like if you zoom out, your walls and roofs are transparent.
Yes.
What's
So
for that for?
at the beginning, are they asking why it's like see through from the outside?
They asked exactly, how do you make the roof and walls disappear in editor?
How do I okay.
Because yeah,
Okay. All right. So are they wondering why I can see in from outside or even hear those as well? Okay, cool. So this is a plane basically, right? You select the wall here. So this is just a plane. This is a one-sided plane. Now, I know and you know that this is a wall. Unity says, oh, hey, it's only one-sided, so I can see inside. You want to make sure that if this wall is being, if there's like a scene and you need it to have, and you need it to be double-sided so it can't see in, then I would model it. I would export this, remodel it to have a backside for the plane, because right now it's just one plane that's modeled and textured, and it's just see through. It's the same. I think it's the same thing in Maya. Like you just have one plane side, you like go under it, and it's just see through. I think it
What's
might. Hmm?
It's black, but yeah.
Yeah. So in Maya it's black. In Unity it's just clear because it's just see through. Um, but to and I had talked about this problem earlier. So if you have a scene and say this roof here, if there is a directional light in the scene, uh, and you have light, it'll cast shadows like you're actually just seeing inside of it, and you obviously don't want that, right? Because it's interior. So to fix that, you would just bake the directional light. You would select baked. Let me see if I can show you. So go down here, go to light, directional light. Yeah, right here. You just see that? So it's in real time right now, which means it's fully dynamic. You would just change this to bake, and then you go to your lighting and do generate lighting, and it will no longer have that light going in the scene or like going from the roof, stuff like that. So definitely something to keep aware of for the scenes. What's up?
So if you had an object that was swimming with a light object, you could see the dynamic lighting from behind. Whereas if you had static, you would just stay in place while the object was swimming.
Yeah, so if you have an object that's swinging and you want the light to update, that has to be a dynamic light or has to be a dynamic emissive material. So dynamic emissive materials basically is just you have this material here. That's skybox. So we go to just more P. Lit. Yeah, we'll just use an unlit one. Yeah. So right here, actually no, that's not it. Yeah, it is. Is that not showing up? Okay, here we go. So yeah, here's the emission. You would just click that, change the color to whatever you want the emissive material to be, and then you just drag and drop that onto the object's mesh. And if you wanted it to be dynamic, you would not have the object. Say you have like this floor here, and you want it to be illuminated, or you have like a window pane, right? So right here it's set to static. This is the prefab. You can either A, go in and it will change it for all instances in the prefab here, where you deselect static from the tag, and then you also deselect static from the object itself. So right here you see the material. You could honestly just have this as emission. If you wanted to be fully dynamic, you wouldn't bake it. This is not dynamic because it's a floor. But if you have something that's going to be swinging in, you could just have an emissive material on it, and then through the use of light probes, you can have the light and shadows update dynamically. To show you that, I won't be able to like really show you that in this scene because it doesn't have light probes in it. But to show you light probes, this is what a light probe group looks like. And again, if you are using any version of Unity that is not 6,000 and above, you will have to manually set these up. They are very time consuming. They're very tedious. So all you got to do, just exit or enter the light group editing. You can then shift select multiple of these. You can either duplicate or move the originals as well, right? So again, you want to space these out based off of what you want, and test and iterate as much as you can. Once you have the light probe group set up, you can just go back to the lighting panel, do a bake, and then if you have a dynamic third-person character or dynamic objects, you can go in the scene, test it out, see if it's updating correctly. and then if it's not, add more, rebake, rinse and repeat. So
Is there no way to make it as you change the value, like real time?
no, so you have to set it up in the scene, um, and that's the one thing I hate about lower engine versions of Unity is that you have to do this by hand. Whereas in Unity 6000 and above, they have the adaptive pro volume group, which you can just have set up in the scene, bake, and then it's done for the scene. Like it's automatically set up for you, right? You select that you want to use adaptive pro volumes, and it's automatically set up for you. Unreal has this by default in every scene, so something to keep in mind. Any version, any engine version below Unity 6000 will you will have to manually add light probes.
That even with the dynamic lights, unless you set up the probe, it won't affect anything that's moving underneath it.
No, so dynamic lights will update their light and shadow. Um, that is inherently just how dynamic lights are. So the reason why we use light probe groups is if we have a static light, um, say for instance, like this one isn't static, but this is mixed, right? Yeah, this is mixed. So here you can see the attenuation radius on it, what it looks like. You can adjust this. This is like the center, like glare of it and whatnot. This is the outer radius for how far you want it to expand. So let's say it was baked. Baked lighting, if we remember, baked lighting does not update shadows or light in real time. So they are stagnant. They are at a fixed point. The way to have the light from a static light update at real time is to use the light probe groups. So that way, when a dynamic object comes through, it now is receiving that light and shadows. If you just have a object move through it when it's a static light, lighting will not be reflected on the dynamic object or the shadows, right? So if I just take like a 3D like cube, so this is a mixed light. So this will update. So this will update shadows. So you can see right here. It's going to update. You see that shadow appearing from the light. So it will update because it's mixed. Remember, mixed lights. The light is at a fixed point, but it will update the shadows dynamically at runtime or even in the scene editor.
But if you want to do that with the static light, then you have to set up the light probe group.
Yeah. You have to set up a
That's
light probe
cheaper
group.
than turning it into mixed or.
It depends. It depends on your scene. You can only have about three real time lights within a certain radius of each other. Um, when if you have more than that, like you say you have four dynamic lights in a very close group, one of them's going to give out because Unity's like it can only have three. It was like this for the longest time with Unreal Engine 4, and then Unreal Engine 5 came out, and Lumen was introduced, and that was no longer a problem because it was fully dynamic. So when you have yeah, so if you have a dynamic light, you can use dynamic light if you want to have the most realistic lighting, and if you have the uh, resources for it. Again, dynamic lighting is the most realistic. It is also the most resource intensive, so it's going to ding FPS on your game. Which, if honestly, like you can get away with 60 FPS 1080p, that's totally fine. However, if you were to like put it at 1440 or 4K, it's going to dip probably below 30. Depending on the lighting. Which is why a lot of like games that are like big budget games from AAA, why they're like locked at 6 or 30 FPS, and people complain. That's kind of why. Um, but yeah, if you want to always strive for 60, no matter the resolution. So you're gonna want to use different kinds of lights, different kind of light types. So that way it is more optimized on your end, right? You want to make sure that it's very optimized for gameplay. Again, cinematics doesn't really matter. Use as much as you need, but again, for gameplay, for what we're doing, for making games, yes, make sure it's optimized. But yeah,
Like, could you show me how to make like emissive bar light? That's what I wanted to do for my previous project.
Mhm.
I just couldn't figure out how to make the light emissive and also long enough so that it shines underneath.
yeah. So there's a couple different ways. I like right here, you'll have the model itself will have this light modeled in and it'll have a texture on it. So if I go to right here, actually this is not a good one to show. Let me see if I can find a clearer one. Yes, door arch. Here we go. So right here, here is the emissive material. Your designers will set this up when they are brought into engine, and you can change the color. Oops, not that one. Oops. It is this one, the emission map. So you want to make sure when the material you make, if you want it to emit or simulate a light, you want to check the emission right here, and then you can go and change the color to whatever you want. Right. So we've got different colors, and then if this material is used across multiple instances, keep in mind it will update all instances of it. So you change the color. Like if you want this doorway arch to have a specific color, all you would need to do, like if you only want this doorway arch to be the only one affected, like a different light than all the others,
Just copy the material.
yeah, just duplicate the material, change a different color, and then add it to here. Right?
The mission doesn't affect anything around it. It's just
It does. Yeah, it does.
so
So
for that you have to bake it.
yeah, so if you bake it, that's when the light will truly show. Unity does a really funny thing about missives. So in order to trigger them correctly in Unity, you have to have a post-process volume in the scene, and you have to enable bloom. So bloom is going to give you that like light emission aura from the material. So right here.
And yeah, with the got ray you said, like I'm in Professor Herrera's level design,
Hmm.
and we were working on the Unreal Engine with the see-through glass
Hmm.
because we set the directional light to go through there and then turn on the bloom, kind of like have the ray actually coming out from there. You
Yeah.
can get a similar effect on Unity.
You can natively. It is not in Unity. You have to do it through either VFX Shader Graph, or you could go into Photoshop and make a gradient texture and apply it to like a planar mesh in Engine. And basically, you could either do a particle effect where it simulates God rays, or you do like a texture and put it on a planar mesh through the window, and that's how you would get God rays, right? Because URP again is meant for mobiles and um, light desktop games. HDRP, I believe, will have God rays in it, but it's unique solutions that you will find in the technical restraints where you really shine. And so you definitely want to tell people, being like, hey, like when you go and do workshop, is that you'll have brand pitches and you'll basically say, hey, I'm a 3D modeler. Here's what I do. I know what gameplay ready assets are. I know how to make them good. I have quick turnaround. I take feedback really well. Stuff like that. You want to show that you know what you are talking about. So if you're a level designer, you want to show that you do. You could do like a GIF where it's like, hey, here's a white box. Here's like the assets I'm starting. There's free assets on the Unity Asset Store or in Unreal Fab Marketplace. There's free assets. Just show like a time lapse of it, because you will be expected to build out levels. You will be expected as a designer to know how to do triggers and certain stuff. You want to bridge the code and art together, and then that will make the game run really well. So keep that in mind for when you're doing brand pitches. So to get the effect, I don't actually have it here, but here's the intensity. You can just increase this. See how the light's emanating for it? Yep. So that's literally, that actually looks so much better now. I forgot I didn't have that. So yeah, you can just drag and slide this as much as you want, and then we press play here. You can see it'll update. It is a step. It is a static. Okay, yeah. So let me turn that down. So it is a static. It's a static object, right? So it's baked. It's on the light mapper texture, and okay. Hold on, zero.
So like for this, even in the editor, you can see it without baking, like the change.
Yeah, so you'll see that like the color is applied to the asset, but until you do a bake, it's not going to have that emissive glow to it, right? So it'll have like the color, but then you'll want to have it be baked, and then you want to add bloom. Obviously, not a lot, so because the more bloom you add, it's going to affect every light in the scene, not just that emissive material. So if you keep it very low, it will not be such a sore to look at, and it's very very minimal. What's up?
Just like the pulsing,
The pulsing?
or like the lines that are moving every time you use the camera,
Oh, on the floor?
like all floor or
Yeah, that is the reflection probe. So as you're moving as you're moving through the scene, you're gonna have updated reflections
like
as
you
you
see the
move through.
lights right under, you see the walls right here, like the lines.
Oh, that's
And
Indiana.
daily.
Yeah, anti-aliasing. Yeah, yeah. So there is different anti-aliasing settings you can do. I think I'm running TAA in this, which is really expensive. But also up here you have the stats showing it and whatnot. So yeah, laptop. Yeah. So typically, like on my rig, I'm getting about like 90 to 100 FPS at 4K. I think this is at 4K. Yeah, it is. Okay. So I wouldn't recommend cranking things up to 4K for your game projects because that's going to be a lot. Um, but it is something you could do for your portfolio to make scenes look really, really good. So yeah, we have post processing. This is a global volume, so this is boundless, right? You can have and then for this one, this will have a profile for it. You can again, like the lighting render asset, you will have the profile for the scene, and if you want to have different profiles, you would need to either create a new one from scratch, or to keep cohesion, you can actually no, I would recommend just creating um like a new profile in general and not duplicating, because scenes will be different and whatnot. So I would, again, it'll be at the very end, but like the lighting render asset, make sure it is the correct profile you want for that scene. There's different priorities, which basically means like, hey, not bad. There's different priorities, which basically means like, hey, this one's gonna show up first before this other one because it's at a lower priority. Stuff like that. Really, really useful for interior to exterior scenes. You can also do the uh, what's it called? Yeah, priority right here. Weight. You can also reduce that to help blending on the in between different post processing volumes. So light probes, and then one of the last things, the reflection probe right here. It's this little white dot. So as you can see, I just have it set up to this area. You can do multiple different ones. It's all scene dependent. If you're finding that you're not getting the correct reflections updated, you just add multiple, and you can just bake right here. And then if you have multiple, you just do bake all reflection probes. Typically, the default settings are fine. Again, if you have box projection, you know it will box projection. Remember, is for interior scenes that are rectangular in shape. They're very very good. But you can also have a boundless one for exterior scenes or even an interior. It all depends on the scene and how it looks.
Thank you.
No problem. Have a good one. Yeah. So again, default, and then you also want to make sure that you have HDR enabled for high dynamic range to get the best fidelity on it. And I think that's pretty much it. So yeah,
So anything inside the reflecting from the material set to metallic is going to reflect anything that's
yeah. If that asset has a metallic on it, it should reflect. As you can see, it is this part here and this bottom part here. Um, Even as you go through the scene, the floor has metal on itself as well. These little cracks right here, cracks and crevices. So you can just easily have a reflection probe in here. If you're not getting the results you want, you can add multiple. The reflection probes can be blended together. When I say that, you can have you can basically just have them overlap, right? So it's very very simple. Just have it overlap if you're not getting the result you want from a boundless one. You can add multiple ones here. Oh damn, 200 FPS on 4090. Okay, okay, all right.
Go back to the this one?
That's pretty much it for lighting in Unity. Interiors are harder than exteriors, so they will face more challenges as you saw right here with like looking in the ceiling. We discussed how that's because it's a planar asset and how the sun will interact with planar assets in Unity and the workaround to that as well. So definitely keep that in mind for your games, especially if you're doing exterior to interior or interior to exterior, et cetera, et cetera. Any questions? Good. All right. I think that pretty much wraps up everything. Thanks for coming out, guys. Hope you learned something. The slides will be available as well, and Gio will be editing the video and should be released over the weekend.